Here we have the feeding instructions on the starter from Nancy Silverton from the La Brea cookbook, from La Brea Bakery cookbook. And you can see there's the feeding, and then it just keeps increasing over time as you end up with more of it. But it's best to do things in terms of weights instead of doing them in terms of cups, because weights can vary and depending on how much moisture is in there and things like that. So that's my recommendation. This will give you way too much starter, so start doing some math and dividing down and ending up with less. Here's a nice close-up of our starter. You can see it's nice and bubbly, and I'll kind of go in for a close-up there. You can see the bubbles on the surface. Very nice and bubbly. And so as we go through it, you'll see sort of it's alive. It's got lots of texture and lots of bubbles are in there. So that's sort of the general idea of our starter. So it's more liquidy than a dough, and so sort of like a thick pudding type thing, I'd say. So there is our sourdough starter, and I will show you how to feed this and keep it going. Well, many of our recipes call for sourdough starter, so you've got to have it. How do you have it? Well, first you have to get someone to give you or send you some starter. So once you have that, then what you have to do is feed it. So the way you feed it is, assuming you have some quantity, let's go with, in this case, 2 tablespoons, and of course, however much you have, or however much you want, you can look that up later, but let's say you have 2 tablespoons, just to give you an idea. So if you have 2 tablespoons of it, and all you really care about is ratios. So what the ratio is you're going for is 2 parts starter to 1 part water and 1 part flour is the feeding. So until you get used to it, and eventually you can just sort of eyeball it. But for now, all right, so we have our 2 tablespoons of starter. So what we're gonna do next is get some flour. So we will get 1 tablespoon of flour. There you go. And then we will get 1 tablespoon of water. So here's our 1 tablespoon of water. And there we go. And so now we have our nice ratio of 2 to 1 to 1. And again, if you're doing it in a larger quantity, let's say you had 2 cups of flour or 2 cups of starter. So if you have 2 cups of starter, and then you would add 1 cup of water and 1 cup of flour. And let's mix that up. And you just want to mix it to incorporate it. So once it's mixed in like that, you're done. You're not trying to make bread out of it. So there is sort of what it looks like, and gives you a general idea of the texture. And you let it go and you feed it 3 times a day, or I found that you can actually modify it and do it twice a day. But the general idea is you want 8 to 12 hours between feedings, and your starter is the most active and ready to go between 8 and 12 hours after feeding. So once you've let it sit for 8 to 12 hours, that's when it's perfect to go ahead and it's really hungry, and that's when it's good to cook with it, because it's going to be hungry and act as a great leavening and have good flavor. So, but there you go. So you can feed it 2, 3 times a day, and when you're done with it and not using it, just stick it in the fridge if it's for a long period of time, and then take it out and for about a day feed it to get it going. And as I mentioned before, if you have too much starter and you don't know what to do with it, best not to just keep feeding it, because you'll end up with way too much. So make some sourdough pancakes or something, or worst case, it's a horrible thing to do, but just get rid of it. Get rid of the excess. Don't keep feeding the excess and have more excess, because you're gonna have more than you know what to do with. All right, let's take a look and see what our starter looks like. Sort of expanded a bit, a little gas got created, so it bowed out a little bit on this container. Oh yes. So now we have, how much? That's right, 4 tablespoons, because we had fed 2 last time and then put 1 of water and 1 of flour, so that adds up to 4. All right, so we're now at 4 tablespoons is what's in there, because it keeps doubling every time you feed it. Again, we're gonna put in some flour and some water. So let's put in our 2 tablespoons of flour. 1, 2, and then you can put a little extra if you want. Slightly more flour than water, but only slightly. So there you go. So there's 2, and then we're going to do 2 of water. 1, 2. There we go. And then we'll mix this up. So there we go again. And we sort of mix that in. And again, you just want to mix it enough to incorporate it. So we're going to mix it enough to get this all together. And it had been sitting for 8 hours since the last feeding. And again, when you first get this thing going, you can sort of do 3 feedings a day, but often I find 2 is plenty. And you can sort of let it sit 12 hours between. And the best time to use your starter is after it is sat for 8 to 12 hours and is really raring to go. All right, here's our starter. So there's our starter that we started with just 2 tablespoons and then added some water and some flour. And so we can now take a look at it and you'll sort of get an idea for the texture. You can see how it comes to life. So we're about to see that. Exciting, exciting. Here it is. Ooh, look at that. Hibernating for a while. It might take a little longer to get bubbly, but very quickly it'll be bubbling and that will bring some great flavor and will be a great active yeast. There it is, and that's what it looks like after just sitting overnight and eating up all that flour and water, and those little guys are very active, and you can see all the bubbles that have formed, and so it's nice and active, and it's a good amount of time that this would now be a good time to use it. It's as I said, very active, and so the little yeasts in there in the starter will go ahead and help your bread rise and add flavor. And let's verify that. Oh yes, it's very aromatic and has a little bit of a fruity flavor, so I like it. All right, so there you go. Happy baking. There's your starter. And remember, you can end up with too much of it, so don't overdo it.
A Griff Monster DVD production.